going on there, youth pastors? Paul Turney here from the discipleproject.net and your host of the Youth Ministry Motion podcast, the podcast that wants to keep you motivated and your youth ministry moving forward. How are you today? Hey, listen, I'm going to keep the introductions short today because I know this is a longer interview, but let me tell you what, this is a great interview with Todd Rhodes from Chemistry Staffing. We're going to be talking about the 2024 Church Staff Health Overview Assessment, and it is going to be jam-packed with all kinds of good advice, especially if you are either looking for a job, a new job, maybe moving from the church that you were at, or you're a new youth pastor. You say, Paul, teach me the ropes. How do I do this thing? How do I go in for the interview? What are some things that I need to keep in mind about the church landscape right now that when I walk into that interview, I can have the right information? Well, this is the show for that. This is what you're going to learn during this hour. Now, if you want to get your hands on the 2024 Church Staff Health Overview Assessment, just go ahead and email Todd Rhodes over at podcast@chemistrystaffing.com. I'll put a link down below for that. And for lots of other good information, you can visit chemistrystaffing.com. They have a daily podcast, lots of great resources there. I encourage you to check it out. I want to say to our guests today, if you're brand new today, first time checking out the podcast, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part today. And if you're a regular, as always, I appreciate your time and your attention. I do have one offer for you today. If you're not yet a subscriber to my newsletter, I have a new resource for you, and it is called the Youth Pastor's Guide to the Interviewing Process. It's a two-part PDF. The first part is 11 interview questions every youth pastor should be able to answer in an interview. And the second part of that is 17 questions every youth pastor should ask in an interview. If this is of interest to you, I'll put a link down in the show notes. You can get it, sign up for the newsletter, and then you will get articles, videos, and encouragement in your email every week. My guest today is Todd Rhodes. He is the co-founder of Chemistry Staffing, and Todd has invested over 30 years in serving churches, having served as a worship pastor for over 15 years, a church elder for more than a decade, and in various ministry leadership roles in both the business and nonprofit sectors. Today we discuss the 2024 Church Staff Health Overview Assessment, and boy, is it packed with all kinds of good stuff. Todd breaks it down. Let's get into it. Todd Rhodes, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
I'm excited, man. I mean, this, and we're going to have you talk about it right off the bat here. The Church Staff Health Assessment Report. Wow, is that valuable? Please tell us what is this and what's in it, and why is it of such value to pastors and youth pastors to read this thing?
Sure, absolutely. Well, we put this together. We did it actually in 2023. Was the first edition that we did, and then we did it again, the exact same assessment in 2024 to try and see if there were any changes in staff health. But we asked as many people as we could, church staff people, senior pastors, youth pastors, whatever, to take this 50-question assessment. Each question was like a 1 to 5, I'd strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree, but 50 questions on church staff health. And the responses we got back were about 1,200 church staff people, which is a pretty sizable standard.
It is pretty
size audience that actually responded to the survey. It was up, I think we had about 1,000 last year that took it. So, but at the end of the day, we ended up with an 84-page, it's a beautiful PDF that we offer for free. And I'll tell everybody, all your listeners here in a bit, how they can get the free report. But we found insights on 7 key areas that we think are essential for healthy church staffs. Okay. So we found information on communication, job satisfaction. We asked questions on leadership, on team dynamics, on compensation and benefits, work environment, and future stability. How long you think you're going to be in your current role. So it turned out to be 84 pages long, lots and lots of data to go through. And we not only asked the 50 questions, but then we also asked some narrative questions at the end, according to how a person scored, to kind of ask them, how they're doing, insights as to why they feel the way they feel or where they
Mhm.
are staff
Yep.
health wise. So, um, it- I don't know of another survey exactly like this that's been done, but it's given us some really good insight. And that's what we do at Chemistry Staffing all day long is we work with churches that are looking to hire, but we also work, tons and tons with candidates that are in transition. And some of them are really healthy and, just I feel like God wants me to, he's opening up a new chapter in ministry. And some come to us um, really much, we call it at risk is the category.
Okay.
Some of them are very, very at risk. I mean, they're burned out, they're tired, they're in an abusive church or a bad position. And this survey has been really kind of helpful to speak to them and to the people that are extremely healthy.
Yeah, and by the way, when we say data, I just want to let people know that this is not small print. This is very well done. It's big, it's bright. You can see the data. You don't have to dig for it. It's all right there. The graphs are there. The
There's
charts are
pictures
there.
and graphs, yeah.
But let me tell you what, I'm a picture guy,
Me
and so
too.
look, it's all right there, right up front, so you can see it, for sure. But tell me, uh, when I was reading it and I was reading through and I noticed that staff members' tenures, and this is something that's always out there, it's always floating around, especially about youth pastors. But notice that staff members' tenure at a church 6.7 years. Now, does this go for youth pastors? Was that broken down into certain staff? I know because you break it down into worship pastors and so forth. But did you find a number for youth pastors, or was this across the board?
It's lower for youth pastors
Okay.
across the board. I mean, go figure. Um,
Shocking.
the number I've heard floated around before the assessment were 1.5 to 2 years. Our assessment shows it's a little bit more than that, but yeah, and even the 6.7 overall is kind of there has to be a little bit of a misnomer there, because there are some people that stay at the same church for 30 years, right? So that
Yeah.
that increases the average level, but there's a heck of a lot of people that leave their church before the 2 or 3 year mark. So I can give you a number. I will say that and youth ministry is different too because you have people that feel like they age out. There are some youth ministry
Hmm.
lifers, and then there are others that are like, no, I feel like, my co-founder Matt Steen says he used to be a youth pastor, and he's like, I knew when I did a shut in, an all night, an overnight thing. He's like, I got up the next afternoon and thought, I can't do this anymore. It's
Uh,
physically
I'm
I can't do it
Yeah.
anymore. So what we find with youth pastors, obviously, and we can talk about, I'd love to talk about kind of some of the trends we're seeing with
Oh,
with
please.
pastors. But it's either the 1.5 and 2 years, or it's the 8 to 10 years, right? We're not seeing, if you can get through the first 2 years, kind of that honeymoon period, to where you're in the right spot and you're starting to do some real ministry, then the chances of you staying there longer term go up exponentially. But those first year and a half, 2 years are just, they're make it or break it.
Well, yeah, I think that's why Doug Fields wrote that book, Your First 2 Years.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Doug
Uh,
knows a thing or two.
yeah, you think right,
Go
exactly.
figure.
And listen, I'm with Matt Steen. Matt, if you wind up listening to this, buddy, I feel you. The lock-ins for me have been long, long gone. And even when I did them, I started them at midnight. I did not start. Some guys want to start at 7 p.m. and go to
No.
6 a.m. No,
Yeah.
sir. We started midnight, done at 6, really. Breakfast, pick up at 7. That's a free piece of advice for all you youth pastors out there. Just
There
just
you go.
start at midnight. Okay. Otherwise you have too much time to fill and you got way too much trouble that could happen in those hours. Let me tell me about the shifts here that are going on. You talked about the shifts. Tell me about shifts in church staffing, especially post-COVID. And what advice do you have for those that are listening in the job market today?
Absolutely. Well, let me talk kind of Big Tent, not just youth pastors, just some of the things that we've seen overall in church staff. So senior pastor, youth pastor, worship, whatever. The first thing and you mentioned COVID. I am so tired. I'm so over COVID.
Mm,
At the same time, COVID was it was a benchmark, right?
yeah.
It was a point in time that in many ways in the church and for sure in staffing, in how churches staff their church, it was kind of a point in time that changed a lot of things, and it's still changing a lot of things, believe it or not, 5 years later. One of the things that we found uh, that has been true and continues to be true is just there is a shrinking number of full-time vocational people. Okay, whether it's youth pastors or worship or senior pastors. Um, is that new? It's been going down for the past generation, but COVID really widened the gap and moved things quicker. So, from a senior pastor standpoint, the number of conversations we've had in the past 5 years from senior pastors that have said, I had 5 or 10 more years left in me, but COVID just knocked the snot out of me, and I don't know it's so different. And help me with my succession plan because I just need to do it sooner. Um, we've had people that, particularly, since we're talking about shrinking numbers, particularly youth and worship categories that have really been hit by shrinking numbers. The reason I think that is, and this is kind of anecdotal, but I talk with candidates, we talk with tons of candidates.
Yeah.
When COVID hit, um, and I remember where I was, it was like a day. It was like a Thursday. I remember it. Everything was fine. You kind of heard about this virus thing going on, and then I'm in Ohio. Everything shut down. My son was sent home from college. The everything just shut down, including churches from Thursday to Sunday. Churches shut down, like everything shut down. And a lot of churches didn't do any live streaming at that point, even though it's commonplace now. But you got to remember, 5 years ago, a lot of churches just didn't do it. So who do they call? They call the worship guy, and they call the youth gal, right? Why? Because the worship person knows technology, right, as part of
Yeah.
their role,
Yeah.
and the youth person is probably one of the younger, more tech savvy people. And they said, oh crap, we've got to figure out a plan for Sunday. Can you help us do it? And like every good youth and worship person, they said, sure. They like to do that kind of stuff anyway. So they stepped in, they did all the technology piece, and they pulled out a major feat in 4 days. They went from we've never streamed a thing in our lives to we're live streaming our worship service that nobody can attend. That was all good and it was fun, right? Fast forward about 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, according to where you were in the country. All of a sudden, people could meet back together in person again. You could meet with your youth groups. You could gather groups together. The only thing is that now you still had, not everybody came back, and you still had to do all the tech stuff. You still had to do the live stream.
Yeah.
And we heard that story time and time again, this hit a year, 18 months into it, that youth and worship people that were now responsible for the whole worship program, their whole youth program, just like they were pre-COVID. Um, they had to do that, plus they had this other job, almost another full-time job on top of it, and they were beat.
Yeah.
The number of people, it was, I'm not kidding, Paul. It was a third of the people that we talked to 18 to 36 months after COVID that wanted to transition. We couldn't feel good about moving them onto another church because they were so beat up
Yeah.
and so tired and so unhealthy. So honestly, what happened? I'm talking a long time here just on the
No,
one thing.
please,
Never get
please
to it.
continue.
But
This is all great information. I would say this though, that I think there was probably a missed opportunity for salary negotiation during
oh,
during this time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, to everybody's credit, everybody, I mean, it was we'd not gone through any of this stuff before. So everybody pitched in and did what they had to do. It was just, things changed, and 12 or 18 months later, you're still, there's no relief. We heard from a ton of candidates that they're just like, I don't, well, here's how we put it to churches that hired us, and we're hiring youth pastors specifically.
Yeah.
When you talk with a potential youth candidate, it used to be the question they were asking is, do I want to work for your church? Right? Now the question after COVID wasn't, do I want to work at your church or somebody else's church? It was, do I want to work at a church? That was massive. And we saw a lot of people that told us, I mean, and this, you might think I'm joking, but we heard the story, the specific story enough that it was like, what's going on here? We had a good number of people that were full-time youth ministry that still love Jesus, still passionate, got the snot kicked out of them in COVID. And they said, you know what? Church was paying me $35,000 a year with no insurance. And I discovered that I can work at Amazon and make as much money, have full benefits. I don't have to work the weekends, and I'm home with my family at night. And I can still volunteer on the weekend. Um, we saw tons of people that just left ministry altogether, whether it was youth or worship or all kinds of stuff. And at least now they're starting to come back very slowly. But we had a lot of people. So what for us as a search firm, and I've talked to some of our other colleagues at other search firms as well, and they're seeing the same thing. It's getting a little better, but for us, um, it used to be youth pastor in specific, used to be some of our easier searches because there were always a lot of youth pastors out there that were open to moving to a different place.
Yeah.
After COVID, there are harder searches because there just are not there are not a lot of youth pastors that are there. Now, there's other things that make it even more complicated that we can get into, but there are less. And then where it really hit us in youth ministry, and to push back on this if this is not what you're seeing, uh, there's in the current youth ministry pool. The thing that's changed from pre-COVID is there are a lot of really great rock star young candidates, right? There are a lot of good people that have the lifers are still there, right?
Yep.
It's the middle that was just absolutely gutted. It was those with 3 to 7 years of experience that are just like, I like what I'm doing, but I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the cream of the crop. I mean, we lost the
Was that
cream off the
young
top.
marrieds with like 2, 3 kids, that kind of area?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are still those people out there looking, but they're much, much harder to find. So COVID brought that on. The other thing and I'll try to keep moving here. I know we don't have that much time, but the other thing that really changed since COVID was just what we call relocation, reluctance to relocate.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what happened is, particularly in youth ministry, you've got people that, go to Christian college, get a degree, go to seminary, get a degree, move somewhere away from family to take their first ministry role. And during COVID, they felt like they were stuck because they could not, there were travel restrictions. If you remember, you
Yeah.
couldn't go anywhere. So once all that kind of, a year, 18 months into it, and it started to open up again. What we heard pre-COVID was a lot of times was, I'd like to be in the Midwest, but wherever God wants me, I want to be open to it. The conversation after COVID was more like, I want to be within an hour of Orlando, or I want to be within a day's drive of Columbus. And most of those conversations, as we kind of dug into those, were, I want to be back closer to family. I want
Yeah.
to be back closer to home. I want to be back closer to my grandparents. Uh, and these aren't, we always have that with older candidates that need to move back home to be with aging parents, but this was like, 28 to 32-year-olds that are like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I'm
I'm open
wondering.
to change, but I want to be back closer because I don't want to be stuck again and isolated.
Well, I was going to say whether or not that wanting to move or not wanting to move had a lot to do with COVID happening and the fact that in an emergency or in something that happens like this, I want to have a nucleus of people. I don't
Yep.
want to be far away
Yep.
from my parents if they need me or if I need them.
Yeah. So from a practical standpoint, um, from a search firm standpoint, and if I was a church, what I
Mhm.
would say is what used to be 5 years ago a national search. We still do national searches, but because of the reluctance to relocate,
Yeah.
most of our national searches are turning more into regional searches. Which means if you're hiring a staff person, there's a good chance of one of two things. Number one is that the person that you eventually hire is going to be within a 300 mile radius of your church. That's
Hmm.
number one. Or number two, it's whoever you hire is going to want to be back within a 200 or 300 mile radius of your church because they're moving back towards family.
Yeah.
Um, so that's changed, and all of these changes, Paul. It's really interesting. I hate to blame all of it on COVID. You can't blame all of it on COVID because so much of this has been happening for 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been just a couple things really quick. There's seminaries have been shutting down. They've not done a really, not anti-seminary by any means, but they've not done a great job. That's been dwindling for 25 years.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, man, we just don't, as churches, we don't discipleship well. We don't do discipleship well.
You are
You know,
preaching my
Matt,
you are
Matt,
preaching my song, Todd.
Matt tells a story. He was in a meeting a few months ago. Was talking about this very thing, youth pastors, and how hard it is to find. And he said he could tell one guy was kind of, you could tell the wheels turned, and he raised his hand. It just kind of, he was one of the guys that just kind of mumbles his thoughts out loud as he's kind of thinking of them. And he said, I was thinking, I bet it's been 15 years since I encouraged anybody to go into ministry. And everybody around the table said, you know what? I think you're right. I haven't done that forever. When
Wow.
I was growing up, maybe it's a generational thing, but I mean, when I was growing up, that was the option, right? Churches were kind of measured on how many people they sent out, whether it was missions or ministry or those kind of things. And I know my kids, I've got my oldest just turned, I think, 33 yesterday. I don't know that they ever, and I know it just wasn't my church. I don't know that there was this is an option for you. Maybe God's calling you to do this. Maybe this is, I see this in Dave Ferguson talks about, I see this in you conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, we had some great pastors, but, uh, we just don't do that like we used to. So, there's not the pipeline of leaders going to seminary. There's not the pipeline of churches, mentoring people from within. I always tell people, and this is something weird for a guy in a search firm to say, but if churches did a great job discipling people,
Yeah.
oh, it wouldn't need me, you know?
Oh, they'd
And
hire from within.
I absolutely, and I'd go find something else to do. That would be awesome. Um, but so
Well,
anyway,
COVID certainly expedited the what was
it
happening in the world. It
made all
just
the
shrunk
cracks
the
wider.
timeline. It was going to
Absolutely.
happen 25 years later. It just happened 25 years earlier. From that
It,
point of
it's
view,
it sped things up. Yep, absolutely. The
does
the
now
only
you
other
talk?
thing
Go ahead.
oh, the only other thing I would say, and we've noticed this too, particularly I want to say this because it applies to youth and children's ministry in particular. One thing that we're seeing change in job descriptions and just kind of job titles is kind of a change from everything was very specialist oriented. I
Mhm.
mean, pre-COVID, I remember I saw one. It was like um, female Wednesday night youth leader for 13 and 14-year-old girls, full-time position in a church. It's like, that's great. That job doesn't exist anymore. It's we've moved from specialists to generalists, and COVID brought that out. You need to be able to not just do one thing, you need to be able to do a number of different things. And the trend, how that's kind of worked out in a trend as churches have kind of revamped their staffing, is we're seeing a lot more churches that used to have pre-COVID, 5, 10 years ago, had a full-time youth pastor, had a full-time children's pastor, and now they're consolidating that into a next gen pastor, pastor of family ministries, kind of
Yep.
birth to graduation. But again, if you're trained as a specialist, those jobs are harder and harder to find. The more things you have in your toolkit,
Hmm.
as a job, if you're a job seeker, the better you're going to be.
Well, I was going to say that's really great advice. Those that are watching, those that are listening, take note of that. What is your current set, and
Mhm.
what skills can you add to it to
Yep.
make you more valuable? Which then, by the way, being more valuable means you probably can negotiate a little higher salary versus
Yep.
being a specialist that they're not hiring. You know, you can be a generalist with a lot of different things, which then brings me to this, and it's an add-on to what you said. If the if the candidate has changed their way of what jobs they're willing to take and so forth, how has the church changed its practices, if at all, as to how they hire?
That's a great question, and I can tell you, and I am the most pro-church person in the world, but I would tell you, I think as much as changed over COVID, uh, nothing changed. I
Wow.
just went through all the things that changed.
Yeah.
We work with churches all the time, and I think what has happened, the shifts that we've seen, demand that churches look at hiring differently than what they did 5 years ago. Most churches that we work with are hiring like they did 5 years ago. They're hiring replacement roles. Somebody resigns, it's like, well, we'll just grab their job description and go find another person just like them. It's
Oof.
like, no, this is the perfect opportunity to kind of do an autopsy here and figure out what exactly you need, because you might not need that person anymore. Um, so churches are very slow to do anything differently. And the other thing that's just, and I know we're maybe going to talk about this a little bit too, but the other thing that's changed, and it's COVID sure had something to do with it, but it's just uh, the last few years, just economically in our
Mhm.
country,
Yep.
have brought major shifts. I mean, you hear inflation being talked about all the time, but that hits staff members too. So a lot of the churches we work with are small to medium-sized churches, so they might do a hire every 2 or 3 or 5 years. And when they contact us, they want to, all right, well, last time we hired was, 2018, and they're kind of using 2018 as the ground rules.
Mm.
And those aren't the ground rules anymore,
No.
particularly when it comes to salary. I mean, churches really have some sticker shock because it's much, much more since COVID, it's much more expensive to replace or hire a new staff member. And part of it is supply demand, but part of it is just economic realities. Um, one of the and this plays into relocation as well. I mean, if interest rates high, it's hard for churches to offer a wage that allows someone to ever get a mortgage in their community. And that's, with younger people, American dream is still alive. They still want to be able to land a job where they can work
Yeah.
and serve Jesus, but also be able to provide for their family and eventually get a home. And that's really hard in some markets in the
Yep.
country and with some churches with what they think they can get away paying. Say it that way.
Yes. Yes. The economics are certainly and that goes back to too of hiring specialists versus generalists. Of course, churches want the most value
Sure,
for potentially the least amount of salary that they have to offer per se. As
well,
with
we
all organizations, by the way, not
sure,
just the church.
and what we told, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but actually there's more truth to it than not. We've told churches coming out of COVID, hey, the days of hiring a $35,000 youth pastor are they're gone. Okay. So because we had people calling us, we got $35,000, we need a full-time. It's like, no, what you need to do is probably take a couple of people on your staff. If you have a couple people that are making that, um, you're going to have to combine those together,
Yeah.
hire one. And just a kind of a side note, just with kind of trends that we're seeing, back a generation ago, you'd have a senior pastor and then you kind of have an associate pastor, right?
Right.
That title kind of went away.
Hmm.
It's back in full force now. We've got a lot of churches that are saying, "Hey, we need an associate pastor of, it used to be associate pastor of worship and music, right? Which I hated those roles because, people would be passionate about one and not so passionate, or great at one and not. But we're seeing a lot of, whether it's maybe more a family pastor, associate of family ministries, or something like that. But again, it goes back to the going from specialist to generalist. It's going to be an associate pastor. We're doing a few now, associate pastor of worship and outreach, or students and discipleship, something like that, where you have to wear two hats.
Wow, that is dumb. I just think that is so crazy. That's asking like that's the old youth pastor child like the youth guy does youth and children's. And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, what are we doing? That's
Well,
that to me sounds crazy.
and to some churches' credit, I mean, I think just financially, some churches are just budgets are tighter now.
They are.
So, um, so they're like, we can't justify a full-time position for youth anymore, or
Yeah.
we can't justify a full-time position for this anymore. And to their credit, a lot of them are, it's a 75% role, and we're really open to what the other, find us a candidate that's passionate about ministry and Jesus. Their passion might be communications. Okay, we can do that. Or their passion might be, outreach. We'd love that. So
Yes.
they're open, when it is an associate and what hats you're going to play, they're open to those are the ones that are fun
Right.
fun to work with. It's the ones that know we need this and that. That's like, well, those are two different people, dude.
Yeah, yeah. And I tell them, I said, look, I tell youth pastors when they're in those types of positions, I said, look, don't let people double dip. Okay. I mean, they're double dipping. And if you got to do that, then you got to put those two salaries together and find an average.
Yep.
At least get the average out of that. What is the average children's pastor, average youth pastor, and then meet in the middle. Don't let them pay you one salary for two jobs in that regard,
Mm.
because it's twice the work, which then only expedites burnout, which only
Yep.
expedites
Absolutely.
if you're not geared for it, if you're not built, if you don't have any tools or talents or anything like that, that makes it it's shortening, it's creating that year and a half cycle is when those
Yep.
jobs come into play.
Yep.
But excellent information, Todd. That's just super valuable. Now, earlier I was talking about too. I want to get into the top 5 church staff roles, and like I said earlier, I don't know if I'm offended. I think this is just par for the course. But according to this list, of course, there's the senior pastor, there's
Mhm.
the executive pastor, there's the worship pastor, student pastor comes in 4th, and children's pastor 5th. So I guess my only reprieve there is that we're above children's pastor still. So that's shout out to all the children's pastors. We're number
Woo!
4. What does this mean? What meaneth this,
What
Todd?
meaneth this? This meaneth that I didn't communicate this very well in the report, evidently. So these are the these are the let me rephrase. These are the 5 most common church roles. Okay, they're not ranked.
Okay.
I
Maybe
would
that's
say
just
see,
me. I read it that way. That's
yeah,
just me
yeah,
reading it going, "Oh,
yeah. No, no, no. These are the 5 roles that we see most in churches. And so senior pastors, you know,
kind of
that's
a
going to be
gimme.
number one
Kind of a
because every
gimme."
church, every church
Yeah.
has a senior pastor, right?
Yeah.
But after that, I mean, and this goes back, 25 years, a generation or two back, right? Uh, it used to be you'd have a senior pastor and then you'd have an associate pastor. Well, that kind of when associate pastor went away, you'd have usually if you get a church 500 people, you're
Yeah.
going to have a senior pastor, you're going to have somebody doing youth, you're going to have somebody doing worship, you're going to have somebody doing kids,
Yeah.
and you're going to have an executive pastor. So yeah, don't read it. I wasn't slighting any
No,
particular.
no, no, no. I was absolutely not. I didn't think once again, whoever I thought it was like I thought it was like the voting, like what are the top five? Maybe I am reading it right as far as the top five most important positions. We're
Yeah,
just
and
listed
so
forth in the thing.
yeah, no.
That's
So
all.
if you're asking me to rank what the most popular ones are,
Oh
uh,
well, that's up to you. I mean,
I'll take a stab at it because I'm going to give you the consultant answer, right?
please do. Yes, I love it.
It depends.
There we go.
So senior every church has a senior pastor, right? Some are going to the next is like executive pastor. If your church is a certain size, you're going to have an executive pastor, right?
Correct.
Usually some churches as little as 3 to 500 are going to have an executive or an administrative pastor. But normally once a church hits 800 to 1,000 people, they're starting to contact us and say, hey, we've never had an executive pastor, but we think we need one. Okay. So throw the executive pastor out. That leaves you with worship and students and kids. And I think it depends on what kind of church they are. Okay. So if they value the Sunday morning, if they're more of I don't want to say seeker sensitive, that dates me, but more of an attractional model, they're going to put maybe a
Sure.
little bit more emphasis on the weekends and services. And so maybe worship is there. I would say students has been, worship and students, which do you tackle first? If you're a church plant, do I need a worship or do I need a student? A lot of them will do worship and then students. But the other thing, because of what we were saying with the shift, and a lot of churches are putting much more priority on family ministry and children's programming. I would say children and youth. Children's has kind of moved up a little bit with student pastors. If I was to rank them, so you'd still be 3 or 4 anyway, not just
Yeah,
top.
right. And that's another double dip there is like, hey, you're our youth pastor. Can you also do Sunday morning worship? Right.
Yeah.
We got that's the other double dip
The
that I
the
always
answer
see.
should be what? Let's say it together. No.
No, no, that's right.
Yeah,
Uh,
in
so
most cases.
you know what? And I saw for a long time, where do these roles fit in? Things like social media manager or videographer or these titles that I heard a few years ago, where you were the worship coordinator. You weren't the worship pastor. You were in charge of the worship experience, which
Mhm.
could be anything from stage design to what happens as part of the thing. Are those roles not important anymore just because we've figured out, like, people have just figured out social media better, that they don't need particular roles like that? Or
I would say I've got a couple different answers to that. First, I would say that let's talk communications in particular.
Mhm.
Most of the time, if you have a church that has a communications or a social media person, it's a larger church. So I would say 1,000 or more. There are some exceptions to that, but most of the churches are a little bit larger. Same with kind of the worship coordinator thing. However, I'll tell you one of the things we have on our radar, and this is purely anecdotal right now, and again, it kind of comes out of COVID. Um, Churches are finding that what they're looking for is almost a unicorn anymore when it comes to worship and youth and everything else, right? Um, but for a worship person, they're looking for somebody absolutely that knows music and can be the lead person on stage. They're looking for somebody that can master the technology according to what size church you're in. Are you over all the tech? Are you over the lighting and the sound and all of that? But you've got to at least be able to do tracks and software and all of that kind of thing. So you've got those two things. And then you're gonna most of them want somebody that can pastor somebody, that can disciple their team. Okay, so that's a different skill set. And then you've got somebody that can kind of administer the program. That could be, recruiting volunteers and building into volunteers and making sure everybody's scheduled. And all these different things, but people are finding that those people, because many people have left and
Mhm.
there's not as many people, that it's really hard to find everybody that can do one person that can do all of those roles. And what we're finding, and again, this might be a couple of caveats, maybe a little bit larger church that can afford to do this, but also churches that are maybe in a little bit better geographic area with a little bit more population around them. So suburbs or close to a city, college towns, those kind of things. We're finding that more churches are, because they can't find everybody, one person that fits all of those, they're hiring kind of a leader, person that can administrate and lead and even pastor. Um, and they may or may not be on stage. Um, but we're finding, and this is kind of interesting because it works both ways. We're finding that some of these churches are then just hiring lead musicians for a weekend. So they might have two or three, very part-time, almost like gig type people that
Yeah.
come in and lead worship on the weekends.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of the on-stage front person, but behind the scenes is the person that's kind of leading the ministry. And then from the staff person or the musician standpoint, again, we've had a lot of people, a lot of worship people that just got the snot kicked out of them. They love Jesus, they love the church, they love music, and they love worship, but they're like, I've seen the sausage being made, and I don't need the stress of being on a staff.
Yeah.
But, I can go out and I can find something that I like for 20, 30, 40 hours a week and almost make almost as much gigging myself out and leading worship at a couple different churches 2 or 3 weekends a month as
Yeah.
what I did full time on a staff. So these kind of things they're all kind of all over the place, but they kind of come together to kind of
Yeah.
change the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like I said, this is very anecdotal, but I'm starting to see this in more and more churches, from more and more churches and more musicians. That it's really interesting. And I think when it comes to youth pastors, I think there's going to be more and more there. You're always going to have full-time people, but I think you're going to have more and more part-time people that are just like, I've done it full time. I don't care to do it full time. Church did not treat me well full time.
Yeah.
Still love students. God's called me to ministry, but I'm going to go do this during the week. And man, we've heard this from people. I liked being on staff, but I love volunteering with students.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yep.
I understand that. And you bring up the point about, doing gigs, the fact that we're in the, we've been in the gig economy for some time now,
Yep.
where you could do 4 or 5 different things if you want,
Hmm.
and, make fair amount of money if that's what you want to do. And I'm also, a part-time youth pastor now in a very small rural church. And I'm pretty good being part-time.
Hmm.
I have a few other things I could do, right? So I mean, not everybody's in that position to do that, but yeah, having all that to say that I enjoy the benefit. I used to think that the only role was full-time, like
Yep.
I only wanted to do full-time.
Yep.
And more, and probably this is maybe age as well,
I
speaking.
was going to say that's generational.
Generational says, look, the older I get, yeah, maybe not so much. Maybe I just want to I have my part-time things that I do, and then I'd like to spend more time doing my YouTube channel or the podcast or
Hmm.
writing or whatever it is, right? So there's definitely a generational thing, and then there's also those younger kids who want to do 4 or 5 different things, just as part of a gig and not have to deal with you know, all the issues per se.
Yep.
Um, Let me go jump down here to the student pastor health overall assessment there. It says, according to the report, student pastor's health highest rank is good at 31%. So I would ask then, what causes the most damage to the student pastor's health and well-being, and what can youth pastors do to get better at managing it? But also, if you want to throw in there what pastors can do to help mitigate some of that.
Yeah. It was really interesting. And I don't have the figures here in front of me, but I can say youth pastors are definitely in probably in the lead here as far as when you look at the health scale. Okay. So we found there's about 15%, we said exceptional, strong, fair, need improvement, critical. Um, about 15% are just exceptional. They're loving where they're at. They're thriving. They're all in. About 26% are in the strong category. So
Mm.
they're like, yeah, I'm doing really well. There's some things, that I wish could be better, but. So that's 26, 40% are exceptional strong, right? 31%, almost a third are fair.
I want to know how many pastors were over there while they were taking the thing and says, you need to put excellent right there. That's right. Mark that.
Well, that's another can of worms. That's another can of worms to open because we find that senior pastors find that there are much more strong and exceptional senior pastors,
Uh,
right? That would rate themselves as strong and exceptional. And
yes,
why do you suppose that is? It's because they're in the driver's seat, so they're the ones that are kind of setting the
clearly.
direction, and yeah, literally.
Yes.
But about a third, about 32% consider themselves kind of in the fair, and then almost 10% are in the really, I got to make some improvement here or I'm out. And then about 1.5% are what we call critical, which are just like, things got to change or you're not going to be there. So your question is, what do youth pastors do if they're kind of in that fair position?
Yeah.
Uh, and I would say, so my consultant answer again. It depends on the church and the structure and the team model of your church. For some youth pastors, honestly, there's not much you can do uh, to be to be more valued or to have more input, and unless leadership will allow you to do that. Now, what I can tell you is the only thing you can do is you can be proactive, and you can aggressively try to add not only in your area of student ministry, but also in other areas of church life to give input and ideas, and that can really make a difference. We find that there are, and it's a spectrum, but we find that there are, if we want to pick at senior pastors here for a second. I know you've got some senior
Yes.
pastors
Let's
that
do
listen to
that,
you as
shall
well.
we?
That's always fun. Um, we have talked to a pastor yesterday. We're doing a student ministry search for them, and he's like, "Man, here's what I need. Our last three youth pastors have gone on to be senior pastors." Because they come into our church and they learn how to do ministry and they're just
Wow.
scrappy.
God
I
bless
just
them.
need a scrappy doer. I need somebody that loves Jesus, that wants to learn the nitty gritty, how the sausage is made, stuff that happens in youth ministry and church in general. And we will mentor them through it and we will teach them how to do this. And the
Give me that guy's
expectation is
number. What's his name and what's his name and
exactly
number again? Let's give that out because that's good discipleship, brother.
that guy is way over here on the spectrum, right?
Woo.
There are also other people that are other senior pastors that are way on the other side of the spectrum that come to us and say, look, youth aren't my thing. Okay. So I want you to find me a youth pastor that can do it and can leave me alone. You know,
I was
I
just
don't,
gonna say.
I don't have the time to mentor them. I mean, they won't say it this frankly, but I don't
Correct.
have the time to mentor them. I
Yes.
definitely don't want to hold their hand.
Yes.
But just find me somebody that can run a youth ministry and
Yeah.
I'll be fine. For the people that are in a church like that, how do I get more valued and how do I feel better about my role? It's going to be really difficult for somebody that's in the former, where you've got somebody that's like, no, man, I want this. I want to find me somebody that has some grit to them that I can mentor. Man, they're going to have fun all day long.
Yeah.
And they're going to be well prepared when God calls them to do something else. Maybe it's a youth pastor at a different church, maybe it's a senior pastor role somewhere, but they're going to be sent out and blessed. And so part of it is, and I'm not telling anybody to, I guess I am. That's my business. I try and find people
Yes.
jobs,
Please
right?
tell
So
them.
yeah, leave your church. Everybody leave your church. Call me. No,
Not all at once. Not all
yes,
at once, though.
no, all at once. That'd be
Oh,
great.
okay, all at once. All right.
No, I want people to be healthy. And that's why we did this healthy church staff assessment. Our business is helping people find different roles, but we would love for them to, our whole business was built on one of our beliefs is that we try and what we call healthy long-term fit, where we find people jobs that they can minister in for at least 5 years. Because man, once you hit that, so many people, we talk to 24-year-olds that they're talking to us and they're looking for their fourth church. It's like you've not stayed anywhere long enough to do that kind of fruitful ministry that just comes from building relationships and getting to know people. So we don't ever, we would much rather have people be healthy where they are than to have them transition. But when they do come to us and say, I'm looking for a new role, we want to make sure that we help them find a good fit so that they can stay somewhere long enough, get enough change in their pocket to where they can do some real, that's long-term ministry is where the really cool things happen. It can happen in the first year. It does happen in the first year. But man, you talk to anybody that's been at their church 8 or 10 years and they're thriving, they can tell you it all kicked in about year 4 or 5.
Yeah, I was
A
gonna
lot,
say year
a lot of them.
three. Year three, it starts to the momentum can start to change a little.
Yep. Yeah, but so many people don't make it past year 3.
They do not.
Yep.
They do not.
And
So
and spend their entire career every 3 years making a move. And wonder
uh,
why it's wonder why they're tired.
yeah.
You can be tired being someplace long term too, but
Oh yeah.
moving your family and moving every 3 years is just absolutely exhausting.
And you can be happily tired too. You could be like, I am thrilled to be exhausted to be in the
Yep.
place that I'm at.
Yep.
It's a good tired. It's like the I just went on a 5 mile run, feel good about myself,
Yep.
kind
Yep.
of a deal, right? Um, but talking about staffs, and I think you're talking about, that the two different kinds of guys, and I would dare not speak of my pastoral experiences on which, you know, side of the line those pastors were. That would be
Yeah.
another episode, everybody. Subscribe if you wanted to hear those stories. Um, but some youth pastors can feel like they're not part of a team, right? If you're in let's say a team of four, let's say an average of four, you have the senior pastor, worship pastor, children's pastor, uh, and youth pastor, let's say.
Yep.
And they just don't feel like they're a part of the team, and it makes it then it works on their ego, it works on their self-worth in some way,
Mhm.
right? It makes it harder for them to perform. How can a youth pastor make their stock go up or at least start to trend that way? If they're feeling like they're just not part of the team, and it could be for multiple reasons. It could be like the pastor who's just ignoring them, or it could be that they're working hard, but they're not jiving with the rest of the team. They're not gelling somehow.
Every church has a culture and every church has a DNA. And unfortunately, and this might not be the answer you wanted to hear. In some churches, there just is no team, and it's hard to play for a team that there's no team. Some churches, even with much higher than 3 or 4 staff members, you might have 10 or 12 staff members, but there's no team aspect to their ministry. Every staff person, every department is siloed, and it's kind of, you do your thing and stay out of everybody else's business. If you're in a church like that, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It is really hard to, and that's one of the things that the lower the score in the staff assessment, the one of the things that we hear more, the lower the score goes, is I don't feel valued. I don't feel a part of the team. And some churches have, so if you're in a church, if you're the youth pastor and you're in a church that has a very good team culture and you're just on the outside of it, at least there are some things, some communication things, and some things you can kind of do to raise your value. If you're in a church that has a bunch of staff members, but there's no team dynamic, it's probably, chances are that comes from the top down, and it's probably the pastor that's over here on this side of the spectrum. Uh, but it's really hard. It's really hard to stay at that place long term and to feel valued because honestly, you're not.
Yeah. And
Uh,
it's either you have it or you don't. And
it's either you have it or you don't. And we tell people all the time, you can be a part of that culture for a while, but you can't thrive in that culture long term.
yeah,
And if you can do whatever you can to try and fit in and to try and shape the culture, and everybody
yeah,
should, but sometimes you just can't.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that we do when we work with candidates and with our churches is we want to make sure that that they kind of assess that culture before they take their next job. Don't make the same mistake that you had. So and there are some things that we can encourage people to do is during the job search process to make sure that, hey, this is the kind of staff, the kind of church that I want to be a part of.
Can you give me one red flag and one green flag that youth pastors can look for to see whether or not the culture is going to be good for them?
Well, I mean, one really simple one, which is kind of funny, but so if you're interviewing for a church and they bring you on site for an interview and you feel isolated from the rest of the team, they for some reason don't want to, it's like they're limiting access to people or other team members. That's a red flag. You know, if I'm looking to take a role at a church, I'm going to want to get to talk to the people that I'm going to be working with and get them in a room without the senior pastor in the room and say, what's it like to work here? What do you love about this church? What would you change? If a church kind of isolates you away from the team, that to me is a red flag. A green flag on the other side is you need to ask some questions about, who will I be reporting to? In some churches, it's the senior pastor. In other churches, it's the executive pastor. Whoever you report to, you need to have, we call it chemistry staffing for a reason. You've got to have some pretty good chemistry. Now, some of that's going to come out over a long period of time, but you should know if you're on site with a church for 2 or 3 days, you should walk away just kind of in your gut feeling either energized, like I love that. I think I would really like to work with that person. Or you just kind of, I don't know. I don't know if we would quite gel. Sometimes those the how you feel walking away from an on-site interview, um, you have to listen to that. I've heard stories over and over again. I knew this wasn't a good fit, but I did it because they offered it. It's like, no, those hardly ever, ever, ever work out.
That's right. That's right. And never be desperate. Never be
Well, and
desperate, pastors.
that's that's why a lot of people, they take, we tell people don't necessarily take
Right.
the first job that you're offered.
That's
You
right.
know, a lot of factors to, we look at four things just really quick. I go into my sales pitch quick. We
Please
we look
do.
at four things and we assess we think churches um, are wise to use assessments, but they wait too long in the interview process to do the assessments. They interview somebody, they bring them in, they fall in love with them, and before they hire them, they say, "Hey, take this DISC assessment." It doesn't make any difference. You've already fallen in love with them. You're still going to hire them anyway. It could be They could be terrible, but so we move the assessments on the very front end. So any person that we talk to about a potential role, we will ask them to complete 4 free assessments. They're all 25 questions on theology. There's got to be, these are the 4 keys, right? There's got to be a great theological fit. There just has to be. If you don't believe in the virgin birth and your church believes in the virgin birth, you're not going to last there very long. So theology, we do an assessment on theology. We do an assessment on church culture and DNA. Is it the style of church, the type of church that you feel comfortable ministering in? So that's church culture, DNA. We do one on personality. Is your personality going to fit the church's personality and the other staff members? And then we do one on skills and ability. So if you're a youth guy or gal, you're going to get 25 questions on youth ministry. So we get 100 assessment answers from candidates right before we even have a first conversation with them. But the beauty is we ask the churches, every church that we work with, to take the same assessment. So then we can pull these things together. We can find the green flags, yellow flags, red flags. Red flags, as soon as we find a red flag, even one red flag, we tell the candidate in the church, this is probably not the right fit for you. Want to find as many green flags as we can. We agree in the virgin birth. I agree in the virgin birth. Those are green. You're not going to worry about it. What we try to identify for the churches and the candidates, which again is all trying to get to that healthy long-term fit, 5 years or more, is what are the yellows? Because the devil's in the yellows.
Yeah.
18 months in, those yellows are going to be come out as far as why did I move 3 states away to be at this church? Or from the church's standpoint, why did we hire this person? So what we try to do in our process is identify the yellows and actually have conversations about the yellows. And we tell churches and candidates, hey, here are some things that when you guys talk, you're talking to us now, but when you talk to the church, you're going to want to have a conversation about this. And with yellow flags, it's one of 3 things. You either try and turn them red, and if it turns into a red, then they know it's not going to work. It's not a good fit, right? You turn it green. If by having a conversation you can turn that yellow, it's not really a yellow. We kind of actually do agree on this. It's not going to be an issue. That's great. It's a green. Sometimes it's just a yellow, and it's always going to be a yellow. And you know what? Some yellows doesn't make a difference. Secondary, tertiary issues. Are you a 6-day creationist? In some churches, that's a disqualifier. In
Hmm.
most churches, as long as you don't go in and you're not a warrior about, 6-day creation, you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to do great ministry together. But when you identify the yellow flags, determine whether or not, are they green? Are they red? Are they yellow? And if they're yellow, is it a big enough, is it a strong enough yellow that gives you pause to say, you love Jesus, I love Jesus, but I don't know that this is going to work
I don't
well.
know if we can love Jesus together.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And
So
that's okay.
that's kind of our sales approach as far as how we work with churches and candidates. But that's worked really, really well at helping identify issues that candidates can ask churches and churches can ask, when they bring people in or do Zoom interviews with them to try and identify whether or not this has the potential to be a healthy long-term fit.
Absolutely. And I think at this point, I think it's a great time to tell them, the people that are watching, people that are listening, Todd, first of all, where can they get the church staff health assessment? Where they do that, to give them everything, how they can contact you, because I know there's some people listening and watching who are going, I need to talk to these guys. I'm, I need to talk to these guys.
Yep.
Something's got to happen here. So
Well,
tell them how they can reach you.
let's start. If you're a church and you're looking for a staff member, whether it's youth or worship or senior pastor, whatever, just everything's over at chemistrystaffing.com. I think there's a tab up at the top that says churches. You can reach out and you can contact me there. We usually start with a 30-minute call just to kind of hear your story and what you're looking for, and then to see if we can help. If you're a candidate, go to chemistrystaffing.com. You can see all the roles that I think we're looking for like 60 different positions right now. You can see all of those, but you can also, there's an add your resume tab. You can send your resume in and take all those assessments I was just talking about, kind of get in our system. It's all free. You can do that just by going to chemistrystaffing.com. There's a bunch of resources on the blog, all different kinds. I do a daily podcast myself called the Healthy Church Staff Podcast. We talk Monday through Friday about things that are of interest to church staff people, health, and all that kind of thing. But we were talking specifically about the 2024 Church Staff Health Report. If anybody would like to have a free copy of that, just pop me an email. That's the quickest way to do it. It's a URL, but it's long. Just send me an email at podcast@chemistrystaffing.com, and I'll make sure that I get them a copy. It's like 84 pages. It's a bulky thing, but it's got some really good insight in there.
It is. And by the way, youth pastors, I printed this off, just a quick bonus there. Give it to your pastor, by the way. Print it off and share it with your pastor so that they're informed about what makes for a healthy church, right?
Absolutely. We do, we're starting to do what we call a local church staff health assessment, where we will anonymously kind of send the assessment to everybody on the staff and have that really it's really interesting at how a senior pastor looks at church health compared to how a youth pastor or a worship pastor sometimes looks at health. Senior pastors a lot of times think, "Oh man, we're great." Youth guys like, "I'm drowning, help me."
Well, listen, first of all, we're thankful that you showed up with the life preserver today for those that
Yes.
are, and that is chemistry staffing. Chemistry staffing is the life preserver for those of you that are drowning in ministry. So you need to give them a call. You need to find them, get a hold of them. But Todd, thank you so much for your time today. I love this stuff. I love the data. I love the dynamics of church, and I want to thank you for bringing your experience and bringing your thoughts and on the assessment to the show today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, anytime.